Good afternoon, everyone. It's 4:30. I'd like to call this meeting of the Moorhead Public Service Commission to order. May I have a motion to approve the agenda, please?
As revised.
Oh, as revised. Pardon me, as revised. We did send out a couple of changes in the last
Move to approve
few hours.
the agenda as revised.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Okay, we'll slow down. We'll slow down.
If, if staff is looking for the revised agenda and item, they're over on that table.
Okay. All righty. Casey, can we get started now? Okay.
I just thought people look at
Thank you very much. We're ready to, we're ready to roll. I think we have an approved motion on the agenda, right? I did call for a vote.
We did.
Well, I started to, and then we got it.
And then I interrupted.
Then somebody interrupted me. We're gonna talk about that after a while.
It's gonna be a long meeting, isn't it?
Hopefully not. All in favor of the motion to approve the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Agenda is approved. And how about a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve this consent agenda.
Second?
I'll second.
Got a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Consent agenda is approved. Next, customers to be heard or recognitions. I don't see any customers necessarily. We're all customers.
No
Or
recognitions.
recognitions? Oh, okay. Old business. Any old business to attend to? I think we moved it into the agenda, so my friend doesn't necessarily have to bring anything up. He's being so quiet. Okay, no old business. Let's move on to reports. Chuck, I see you're here
Yep,
for the
please,
city
Heidi.
council.
Yep. Just a little thing, we had strategic planning yesterday for just what we're gonna do in the future, but other than that, it's been pretty quiet, so
Cool.
that's it.
Anything fun coming out of strategic planning?
Well, we took personality tests, which is always a treat. Come on, Dennis. Thank you. That's one. No, it was interesting to learn different dynamics of the council.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
no, it was a good session. We did some, we discussed some values and strategic planning, visionary things,
Cool.
so. But the personality thing was most interesting.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. With that group of 9, I can imagine. So.
yeah, no, it was staff too, the directors.
Oh, staff as well?
Yeah.
Oh, so, yeah.
Yeah, big dynamics.
Lots of dynamics, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, all righty. Thanks, Chuck.
Yep.
Public Service Commissioners, anything from you all?
I have a quick one. So I was at the Joint Powers meeting last Friday, 10 days ago. And we had a demographer speaking, and that was very interesting. And I think the numbers he brought up was we had about 240,000 for the metro right now, and they expect us to be at about 340, 350 by 2045, which is like 25 years from now, roughly. And it was really interesting to hear him speak. He also talked about the open the open jobs we have right now. Unemployment rate is still around 2%. And that was very interesting to hear that number, because that's 50% higher than we are currently. So don't know what that means for utility, but as a community, we are still growing very fast.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
we
very
really
interesting to actually see that. He also mentioned that, I'm probably going to get the numbers wrong, but that about 40% of the open positions are $13 or lower. I think it was the number, and that was a little bit concerning. That so many jobs are out there at a lower wages. But overall, I think there's about 7,000 open positions right now in Fargo-Moorhead, so
Yeah.
it's pretty cool.
And unfortunately, that's typical.
Yeah.
The last several years now, that's pretty typical.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anybody else? Shall we talk a little bit about the public meeting, public gathering information on the water tower art? Just to update the folks, especially that might tune in on this. We did have a gathering here a couple weeks ago. Chris, why don't we just call on you for that? We need to get a microphone in front of you. There we go.
Chris Knutson, Water Division Manager. So as Dave alluded to, we had a joint city council, public service commission meeting to kind of discuss the direction of the recoding project for the Woodlawn Tower. And I would say the main elements of the meeting were really to discuss the project, and then to gather some input and feedback from the public, and then to gather some input and feedback from the policymakers associated with the project, and really just kind of get everybody on the same page. Immediately after the meeting, the next day, I believe, we had a kind of the first, what I would call, design meeting for the project. And I believe Cheryl and Christine Thompson
And
were.
it was on the 29th, on Monday the 29th.
Okay. Yeah, and that's really kind of we gathered some feedback from the meeting, and I think a couple of the people that were there actually got appointed to the design committee. So we're really, I think, kind of at the starting point for design of the artwork or graphic that's going to be on the tower, and got some good feedback from the meeting. Other than that, I can answer any questions, or you guys might want to chime in a little bit about the first design committee meeting.
I thought it was a good meeting. There were a lot of people that attended, filled up that conference room. A lot of ideas. I think we were able to somewhat hone in some of the ideas. I think there are some strong feelings along certain veins, but for the most part, I felt like there was consensus in the room. Would you say, Chris?
I would say so, yeah. And we're on a pretty aggressive timeline
Yes.
to get that taken care of.
And the artists, it's my understanding, are the same two
Yep.
gentlemen that helped with the last project.
That's correct.
And that they are probably going to be able to springboard from the last design that they made. Not copy it, of course, but at least use it to start with. And they seemed up to the challenge.
Yep.
I drove through Oakport a couple of days ago. That is a cleverly hidden water tower.
It is. It is. It does not jump out at you.
Nope, it does not.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I drove around that area for quite a while before I finally spotted it through the trees, so I could wind my way back. Okay, anything else on water tower at this point then? Keep us posted. All right. Just a quick note, I'll be traveling at the end of the month to go to the APPA fly-in that they hold every year in DC, with utilities coming in from all over the country, and a few visits up on the Hill. A lot of great information that is imparted on issues. We have then our opportunities to visit with members of our various delegations from around the country. We have a new senator, so it'll be interesting to have a conversation with Senator Smith and her team now that change has been made. So we'll look forward to that. And next month we'll report back. Our general manager will be out there as well, so I don't know if he'll make any meetings, but he'll be there with us. So. He'll make all the meetings. He'll make all the meetings. Mr. General Manager, you're up.
I don't have anything to report under the general manager's report.
Okay. And then new item number 8, to approve the 2018 compensation adjustment for professional and supervisory employees. We've added this to the agenda in the last 24, 28 hours or so. Thought it was important that we get this completed. I anticipated that at least one of our number here would ask about it. So I guess, Bill, I'll start out with you, and then if there are other members of the team that need to address this, and then we'll follow up with questions.
Yeah, I'll begin, and then Nancy Lund may end up answering questions as well. If you take a look at, and it's not right here, but it's in your packet, strategic direction number 3 out of 5 is to attract and retain qualified and competent staff. And as you mentioned a little bit earlier, in the Fargo-Moorhead area and probably around the nation, I mean, it's tough to find good workers. So a compensation plan and a good compensation plan is an important strategic item, and it's also just good management to have a good system. And 3 years ago, Moorhead Public Service hired a consultant and performed a compensation survey and developed a compensation plan. You can see from your materials that we call that our base pay structure. We actually have our professional and supervisory employees that are part of that system. That was developed 3 years ago. We just finished negotiating with our two collective bargaining units, IBW and AFSCME, and we did not include them in the base pay structure. And at some point in the future, we probably will, but it's something that you want to make sure your system is good and everybody's comfortable with that before you do that. Some of the things that we're experiencing here that we're talking about tonight is one of the reasons why you have to be careful in pulling the collective bargaining units into a base pay structure. So, like I mentioned, 3 years ago, we developed this system, and we did a survey of the local area and the region to make sure that our compensation was approximated the market. And what we did is 3 years later, we did another survey in 2016. And because of that survey and the results of that survey, we had some unintended consequences to a handful of employees in the professional and supervisory ranks where they basically, because of the survey adjustments, their wage exceeds the maximum pay for their positions. And what we basically would do then would be to freeze those positions. And the commission talked about this a couple of times over the past couple of meetings and, directed me to put together some options that we could, either soften the blow or alleviate that situation entirely. And so in your packet, you've got 3 options that we could take a look at. Option number 1 is basically to keep it the way we approved it back on December 19th. And, just say that's part of the adjustments that happen from time to time with the compensation system. Option number 2 would be basically to implement the system like we did we haven't implemented the changes yet, actually, but keep what we approved on December 19th, but provide lump sums to those individuals that were subject to the freeze and, do lump sums that would basically provide a lump sum, not on their base pay, but a lump sum equal to the general increase of 3 1/4 that everyone else got. So that's option number 2 in a nutshell. And option number 3 would be to not use the market study that we did in 2017. And not because it's a bad market study, but just because there were unintended consequences. And then what I would do is I would do another market study in a couple of years when we get ready for our next, basically our union negotiations next time. And what option number 3 then would do is basically then everyone would get a 3 1/4% increase, which is what was provided for the 2 collective bargaining units. So that's the general overview, and if you have questions or have any specific things you want answered, Nancy and I can answer those.
Bill, I think the obvious question for me is, since this is a structure to go through, 2020, what happens next year at this time? Does option 3 or option
It
number
doesn't-
2 become, bump, or?
Really, we're just looking at for 2018.
Yeah.
Basically, any of the 3 options we'd still have the same output next year and the year after that, because we negotiated 3-year agreements with the unions.
But we have a report that goes for a couple of years yet.
Well, we
But
would
we've got 5
redo,
people that are exceeding their range.
we would we would have our consultant redo the tables
Yeah.
for all of these positions,
Okay.
and then
Amend the report.
amend the report. And, you know, the numbers would change, but not a lot.
Yeah.
And they basically would go up everything would go up by 3% in 2019 and 3% in 2020. So the big year is 18 here.
Questions? Jump on in. John? Next.
In your summary here, Bill, you said basically the commission approved 3.25% increase for 2018 for all three board public service employee groups.
Yes, correct.
Are these 5 people not a part of our 3 employee groups?
No, they are.
So it says here that we approved a 3.25% increase for all employees. That's what we approved.
You know, it's, yeah, that's a hard question to answer, because what we did, like I mentioned, with the 2 collective bargaining units, they're not in this compensation plan. So the plan is a plan, and it adjusts our compensation with the market. And from time to time, we do that update. We did the market study in 2000, let's see, now it's 17, must have been 2014 when we redid the compensation plan. And we redid it in 17. The employee group that was subject to the market adjustments was just the professional and supervisory group, because we haven't negotiated the other 2 groups into that plan. And we may never put them into the plan. The plan is basically to help us comply with the Minnesota state law on comparable worth. So we're managing the compensation along with that compensation plan. With the market study that was done in 2017, the 3.25 was applied, but there were some market adjustments that made winners and losers out of that one group.
And again, this is my understanding of what the commission was trying to accomplish there. That we weren't told there was any restrictions or reductions of staff salaries because based on that salary. It was the understanding, at least it was my understanding, that there was no negative impact by that survey. The commission approved a 3.2% increase for all employees. And now we're coming back and saying, based on this survey, which is used as a guide to us as commissioners, now negatively impacted some of our most senior and higher staff members within Moorhead Public Service. And I think that is puts across some confusion for the employees as well as the commissioners. And that's where I think we need to make sure that we understand how to use that survey in the future, what it was intended to be used for, and make a clarification. Is that our complete guide of how we're going to manage salaries and compensation plans, or is it a tool and a reference that we use to see that we are complying or have a fair compensation plan in place? And basically from what you say here, I'm led to believe that we had the understanding that we were going to give a 3.25% increase to all our staff.
And therein lies a very important part of a compensation plan, is to make sure and communicate the plan and make it clear so that everybody's comfortable with the plan. And I'll take responsibility for not communicating that to you, or, you know, if there's people in the staff that are concerned about it. And we've got a good plan, and I'd like to make sure we implement the plan as best we can. I think that, you know, you're probably looking toward option number 3, which I'm perfectly fine with. That would basically punt any market study a couple years down the road, and then at that time we would make sure and communicate it both to you and to the staff appropriately. And that is a very important part of a compensation plan, because you want everyone to feel comfortable with how the compensation is being managed.
Part of the reason for this, I think it would be time, or if we can, get input from all the commissioners and see if if they have the same understanding as far as, is that what we are doing or not? And if that's the feeling, we need to go with what we approved, not make any changes or amendments to it.
And I'm with you, John. I looked at the survey as a guideline, and we know why the top, in that survey, why the top was getting, sorry, okay? We know why the top salaries were being reduced, whether it's a leveling because of baby boomers retiring, whatever it was. We know why, but reality is we have some baby boomers here, and why would we go down in their salaries and not give them the 3.25%? I'm totally with you. I mean, we need to do the surveys, we need to figure out where we are, but I don't think we need to be ironclad bound by them, because, you know, there's a number of other entities that have a certain pay structure. I always look at those surveys as here's where others are, and do we fit? Are we way above or way below? But in this case, I think I'm with you, John, on the 3.25. That's what we discussed, and that's what it, in my opinion, should be.
Nancy?
Nancy Lund, Admin and Finance Manager. I just wanted to clarify what the commission, or what we asked the commission to approve back in December. And what we asked them to approve was the exempt base pay structure, so that's this table that we live within. So to approve that base pay structure that was based on 2017 wages, and then that table, the 3.25% increase was applied to the table. So that was the actual motion that was made there, and that's very similar to the motion that we made that was approved a couple of years ago when we created the first base pay system. So we adopted the base pay system and then placed the employees into that at the same time, and that would be the same process that we're doing now. Would be, you know, taking the table, incrementing it by the 3.25, and then placing employees into that table again. So just being consistent with what we did a couple of years ago when we created the first one.
Anyone else? Ralph?
I actually have one question. If we went with option 2, how does that impact retirement? Is that calculated into retirement wages then at some point, or is that just a lump sum that doesn't get calculated?
The option 2 would be the freeze basically of the base salary, and then a lump sum that would be applied in 2018. My understanding would be the 2018 wage would still apply to the retirement, but then of course the following year,
Yep.
the base pay wouldn't go up.
The total that would be recognized as retirement earnings would be the base pay plus the lump sums.
Right.
Yes.
Are we leaning toward a solution?
I'd like to hear from the other.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I don't have the history here. You talk about a table that goes back 2 years, and I certainly don't have the history of that, but as I listen to Ralph and John, I guess I feel very confident in their positions, and I think it's the right thing to do.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
It's mine now.
Yes.
I don't recall the table that we looked at, to be really honest. I'll be really frank. But it was not brought up at that particular point in time that we would see any freezes. And perhaps I should have asked a question or whatever, but I didn't, and it never occurred to me to think that we'd be freezing out people. So I'm inclined to go with option number 3. Thank you, John, for bringing that up, and Rolf for your comments as well. So.
Yeah, John.
I feel quite strongly on this because my previous positions, it always seemed to maybe be a battle here to have salary increases for employees. understand managing expenses and watching expenses as closely as possible. But I also understand when you're talking about a 2% or 3% wage for an employee, it has a much larger impact on them personally than the downside of how much the employer has to really cost us. So we're talking at this point, $14,000 is kind of the estimate here of it. So in our grand scheme of things, when we look at our overall operation, I think it's a very good investment of 14,000 plus additional in the future to support our key staff and all our staff, to provide them a fair and a compensation plan that they feel they understand. And we as commission are voting things, we need to make sure that we try to delve into all the questions and that impact our staff here. So I thank the commissioners here for your comments, and hopefully we can, I guess, push this forward and next year then again address it as how we need to.
My concern is that we would do the right thing for these folks that have been involved. The general manager has recommended option number 2. Any further comment on that before we go after a motion?
I thought about not doing a recommendation, but I just think it's appropriate to try and have a recommendation. Minus the, the poor communications on some of the freeze issues, which I don't think we were aware of them as well. If you have a compensation system, those things do end up happening. And that's really why from a, just a good management standpoint, I was thinking option 2 was probably the better option, because I think you do need to do surveys from time to time just to keep the system credible.
Yeah.
But I also don't have a problem waiting a couple of years to do that. So I mean, really, we're punting the issue a couple of years. We're not getting rid of the survey per se, but we'll do a new survey and make sure we approach it the right way and make sure everybody understands it.
That goes back to my original question, and, I guess we will punt, that's what it sounds like, but if, maybe we move the timetable up on the next survey, yeah, or whatever we need to do, because if we have people banging into a ceiling, then our survey is no good. So, I guess with that, I'd entertain, Ralph, you have another comment?
No, I was ready for a motion.
Well, I'm ready for a motion too, then. If somebody chooses to make one. John?
I would make a motion that we go to option 3,
Okay.
which would be to go back to the date of the initial implementation of the increases and recalculate what the pay would have been, and then make that adjustment, and then go forward with the recommended or the approved rate of 3.25%.
Casey, you got that?
So not exactly as it's stated here, John, is that
Well,
correct?
it doesn't state here that we would go back to the original date of
Okay.
when the increases were implemented. I think if we're gonna do that, it should have been as if transparent as possible.
So January 1. So revert to
Oh, yeah.
2017 exempt base pay structure with an overall increase of 3.25% effective January 1, 2018.
I think that's.
Yep,
All right.
yep.
We good with that?
Yep.
So everything thereafter, option 3, with that added to it.
I second that.
Have a motion, a second, and then discussion. Go for it.
So, I have a question. If we do it the way that John proposed, is the only change that we fix the issue, is there other unintended consequences? No, right? It's the only thing we're gonna do is,
Everybody would get a 3.25% increase.
okay,
Yep.
thank you.
What's the work that we have to do between now and January 1 of 2019?
I wouldn't propose doing a survey this year for that. I would actually do the survey probably early in 2020
2020, yep.
for the,
Next round of
Next round.
yep,
increases.
yep.
Okay,
So that would be the plan.
all right. Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion is approved. John?
I had a very good discussion with Nancy here regarding this matter, and we had talked about how the process worked and how it was implemented. And during that discussion, either she or I discussed that, would it not have been appropriate to bring this to the HR committee or the commission or whatever the case may be? Since we don't have an HR committee at this point, I'm wondering if the chair would consider maybe appointing a HR committee sometime down the future so they can work with staff on the survey or how this is going to be done. Because I think, whoever took it on to themselves to make the decision here, I felt that it should have been brought back to the commission. And or at least ask for a HR committee to be looking at
Floated,
this.
yeah. Yeah,
To be
floated.
reviewed and approved here before those items were implemented. And
Yeah.
we had a good exchange about the positives and negatives of that. So I think Nancy was very good about providing information here, and that was a good discussion that I think maybe in some of these cases, an HR committee could have been helpful to staff to give them their thoughts.
Sure.
And then if necessary, to bring it back to the commission. So that would be something that
Certainly
you
can.
should consider.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm open to anything like that, sure. Okay. Next item up, approve the 2018-2020 strategic plan for Moorhead Public Service. This is gonna require a little conversation. Bill?
I can start the discussion. You all have in your packets a kind of our strategic plan, which the portion that we provided to you is kind of the broad overview. We actually build on this, and the staff develops action plans annually for what we need to accomplish. But there's 5 strategic directions that we have you take a look at, and whether you approve those or add to it. That's what the discussion is basically about. One of our previous commissioners, Les Bakke, he changed our, I don't know if we called them strategic goals before, but he changed it to strategic directions, and I really like that because it kind of forces you to talk about, okay, what direction are we headed in some of these areas, and what should we be focusing our attention on for, say, the next 3 years, even though we're probably looking at a longer period of time. When we do action plans, we do a shorter period of time. One good example of a strategic direction change was a few years ago when we said we're going to significantly increase our spending on water main replacement. And we basically went from $500,000 a year or thereabouts to about $1.5 million a year in spending money on water main replacement, which Chris and his team have done a really nice job of prioritizing where we're going to spend that money. But it was the commission that said we're going to spend more money on water main replacement because that's an issue that that has some significance for us. There's other examples of that as well. I mean, one of the items, strategic direction number 5, is to investigate innovative technologies. And actually, after Go Moorhead, and Go Moorhead was a struggle for us a few years ago. We sold that in 2009, so that's been a little under a decade. But right after that, when we were doing our strategic planning, staff actually came to the commission and said, we want to delete number 5, right? And that was a little bit reactionary, and the commission recognized that and said, no, calm down, staff. Let's just leave number 5 there, and that was a good choice. And under that, you'll find we've done capture the sun, capture the earth. We've done some things there that really we plug in for number 5. We just talked about number 3, which was, having or retaining and attracting excellent staff, and we have excellent staff. We want to keep excellent staff, and I do thank you for the previous item that you talked about. So, I mean, I don't know where you want to go or how you want to start, because this should be fairly free-flowing. We've got 5 strategic directions. Do you want to add to those? Or do you want to talk about what's under those 5, which, you know, we can do either of those. And, you know, I've got questions if you need them, but I want to let you go first.
Anyone have any druthers on that? Shall we start with at least a bit of an examination of these strategic directions? See if we're pointed in the right directions. I might have an idea
Okay.
or a comment about either a 6th one or a revision of something in order to get to something else.
No, I can tee up each one,
Tee 'em
and then
up.
we can just kind of talk about it.
Tee 'em up.
Can I just a
Yep.
front end question?
Okay.
Are these modeled after a strategic plan that was for, say, 3 years prior, or they are modeled after
Yep.
that? And is there much difference here as compared to the last
No.
plan?
I mean, these 5 directions are probably identical to the ones that were there, you know, 3 years ago.
Okay.
I mean,
And then the goals that are under each one, are they somewhat?
they change a bit more. Yep, yep. So, I mean, you probably have, I don't know, 60 to 80% of the goals underneath them are similar to what they were before. And then you have some that end, and then we create new ones. But yeah, that's a very good question. And, you know, some entities do a Saturday retreat, you know, and go through and exercise personalities, or get a futurist in to say, here's where the utility industry is going to be in 10 years. Traditionally, we haven't done that. Last couple years, I think Chair Anderson actually introduced where we would take one of our monthly meetings to do planning. And many of those months, we would take one item, say water main replacement, and we'd talk about that for an hour and a half. And, you know, we would talk about, you know, electric metering or something like that. And we'd talk for an hour to hour and a half. And then that would help staff kind of set a direction. So what you're seeing here, and especially the sub-goals, are probably from those discussions. So there's a lot of background information from those monthly meetings that feed into this. So number 1 is the one that takes up a lot of the time of staff, and it really is to just, you know, operational excellence is what comes to my mind. So, I mean, what are we doing, both electric and water, from an operations standpoint that we should be doing here? And really, the strategic direction there is, I mean, just to continue to build on our excellent reputation and our operational excellence as it exists right now. But if you look at, you know, we treat water, we distribute water, you know, we do all the customer service that we do there. On electric side, I mean, we purchase our power, so we basically get it at our town gate, they call it, and then we transport it within the Fargo-Moorhead area, and then we distribute that. And we have backup power and that type of thing as well. And we do that as efficiently and effectively as we can. So strategic direction number 1 is probably the most important one. But it also is kind of more the day-to-day operational things that we do. So anything that's capital, you know, large capital expenditures would be probably in that area. Everything from a new sludge handling facility, which we've talked about before, to water main replacement. We have talked about whether a lot of utilities on the electric side are taking their systems underground. And they basically take their systems underground for aesthetic reasons and for reliability reasons, i.e. squirrels cause outages. And so some utilities have a strategic direction where they say, we're going to put all of our lines underground by the year 2030. We have not done that because it's costly to do that. We don't have a lot of ice storms in this area, and our reliability is really good. So we have not done that one. But as we mentioned before on water main replacements, it's really tough to be digging up streets in the middle of the wintertime, so, and our system is deteriorating quickly, so we have made that effort to do that. Travis Schmidt and I just talked right before this meeting about areas of town where we are looking at doing some undergrounding of portions of the electric system. And so we're looking at that from time to time. Joe does the same thing. If it makes sense, if the poles are old, the transformers need replacing, maybe it's time to put a portion of that system underground. So we are doing some of that, even though we don't have like a strategic direction per se to do that. But we have talked about it as a strategic direction, and we're analyzing it. We're doing an electric master plan this year. In an electric master plan, we do about, what, every 10 years? And so we've been preparing data in order to do that, and we're looking at getting that accomplished in 2018. And that's where we would ask consultants from the outside, because they've got more experience with what other utilities are doing. And we would say, is it time for us to say, we're gonna underground our system? Alexandria, Minnesota they made that decision, but it's costly. So we've resisted that. So that's some of the strategic direction type items that would be under number 1. Am I missing any large capital projects? Yeah, go ahead. You look like you have a question.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a question. I don't know whether this relates to number 1 or number 2 or number 5 or whatever, but I'm not necessarily finding this, so I'll just throw it out. And Chuck, I'd appreciate you chiming in on this too, if it's appropriate. Where do we talk about growth? I realize that we have boundaries and so forth, but where do we talk about growth and you know, cooperative efforts in that economic industrial development sector of what our community is into? We have an industrial park that grows a little bit now and then. We're actually growing a lot of neighborhoods. We built a lot of houses and so forth. But where do we talk about growth? And so that becomes something that we're strategically engaged in with partners that we have identified, whether it's the EDA or the EDC or you know other players in the community. I'm just wondering how it is that we can kind of sink our teeth into that and start to express it and have a plan of pursuit. And I don't necessarily find
That
one
there.
of these where it fits.
You know, probably the philosophy of myself or maybe former commissions were, and then I think in the industry too, you know, our focus is to run an efficient, effective utility operation, keep rates low, have good reliability. That will attract development, either commercial or residential. That would be under number 1.
Yeah.
And that would be just our regular form of business.
Yep.
If the commission wants to set a direction where we do more than just rock solid utility, you know, infrastructure type thing and service, then I would think you would add a strategic direction that would say, we direct staff to focus more attention on developing, you know, whether you call it economic development or whatever. I think you would say that, we'd put it in here, and then we'd talk about it for a while. And then decide whether you want, because I mean, that really means we're gonna focus attention and resources toward that.
And it seems to me that that's a way for us to pursue the interests of our customers as well. If we're growing what we do and spreading these costs and rates out over a stronger base, that's gonna be good for everybody. But again, I just wasn't seeing it, so I just wonder if we need to spend a little time, and it maybe in cooperation with our partners at the city and at the regional EDC and so forth. Where is Moorhead in where it is that FM, where Fargo Moorhead is going? You know, how is it that we're playing in that sandbox, as opposed to being efficient and having a good reputation so forth, and waiting for it to come to us, which in this competitive community of ours, I think maybe we don't necessarily end up being on the receiving end of that. So I bring it up, and maybe it's an area that we can spend some more time talking about, developing some ideas. Talking with Cindy over at EDA, with Chris at the manager's office, Jim and his staff at the EDC, Craig and his team at the chamber. We've got the MBA here in town with great goals for growth. We've got a new downtown organization. We're investing in so many of these organizations, and yet we're kind of passive, in my opinion, in how it is that maybe we expect to gain from those investments. And we're giving them our endorsements, and we're kind of there, but maybe we're not at the table. So, any thoughts? Chuck? Oh, need a mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You did talk about economic growth in that, but how would you measure that with Moorhead Public Service? Is there any type of measurement with that?
Good question. Is it just simply in sales of new electric use or water, volumes of water? Are we prepared to replace a big water customer if we lose one? Or are we in the game to grow what it is that we're doing in the water side of the utility?
I've always had one fundamental question, doesn't matter if it's a city or the MPS, but I'm just wondering how big do we want Moorhead to get?
Yeah.
And nobody's been able to answer that.
Yeah.
So.
Good question. John? Yeah.
Going on, expanding on that, as part of the EDA, we had talked about Moorhead Public Service used to be a driver for economic growth because of how competitive we were. The last reports that we've been seeing is that is not true any longer. We're at level, or in some cases higher than the regional here. So maybe that's something that we and the city can work together. Is that something that we want to achieve again? And if so, how do we accomplish that? Because, for years and years, we talked about how we could provide low service and quality service here. So I think that would be a tool that we could use if we could get back to that area.
And I just want to build on that too. I mean, what kind of business development do we want with that? Like, businesses that use a lot of water or storefronts, you probably need to isolate that a little bit more. More of a target, more of a goal, in my opinion.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, from a targeting perspective, I mean, yes, we are not price competitive anymore, or not as much as we used to be, but we have very good water, right? So there's people who want very good water, and we have very reliable electric infrastructure. And there's people who, like in my industry, the software industry, who would like to have very reliable infrastructure. So maybe part of our effort is to go after those specific potential, customers that may be interested in moving here. Yeah, from a business perspective. I mean, residential, we know, residential for us is a net zero gain thing. We're not going to make any money. We're going to put the pipes in the system and what have you, but we're not going to make money, and that's not the important part anyway. But we need to look at the industrial side and who does need that good water and who does need that reliable electrical infrastructure, and can we get them here? So I think that's to your point, Chuck. You're right on. As to how big do we want to get? I mean, we have a lot of space downtown, right?
Right.
And from our perspective, that's ideal space because our pipes, our electrical is already there. We don't need to go out to wherever South Moorhead to put new stuff in. It's already there. It's already new because we have put new stuff in there over the last couple of years. So, maybe we can get that infill thing going with the millennials or whatever it may be.
It's a big thing too, is the infill. I mean, talk about urban spiral, we're kind of expanding and, we need to fill the downtown and everything else like that, so.
Well, and these are just the kinds of questions that I I hope that you and others would ask in this whole scheme of things, and having all the right participants in the room. You know, I think it's ripe for conversation and some planning if we can. So, anyone else? I don't mean to monopolize that particular point, but I did want to get that in front of all of you, just from the standpoint of, I didn't see how it was that we were engaging more in a position of reacting, and how is it that we go beyond reacting to what it is that others are doing, and maybe we can help to engage and generate something new. So.
Yeah, I think maybe to talk a little bit more about, you know, how big or how we look at economic development. As the utility, we tend to make sure the infrastructure is in place to provide really good service at a competitive rate. Beyond that, and it is more reactive because we tend to work with, you know, the economic development folks or whatever that come to us with proposals. And then the commission has a policy on economic development, and we do provide rate incentives, which I believe are, I was going to say much more generous, but I mean, most utilities don't even have them. Yeah. So we actually provide incentives that others don't have. We try and partner with Missouri River Energy Services to do things with them as well. And then the focus for those generally are the large water and the large electric users, because those tend to provide the most economic benefit to Moorhead Public Service, also the most economic benefit to the city itself for taxes and that type of thing. So we do tend to focus our attention on, for economic development and those things. It is a bit reactive, just because of a resource standpoint. We don't have an economic development director or anything like that on staff. So we do react to what other people bring to us. So I mean, if you're looking at more of a direction of engaging versus reacting, then you set that direction, and then we come back to you with the resources needed to do it.
Well, we do have an economic development director in the community, and maybe it's something that we can spend a little bit more time talking with that individual about.
Yep, and we've done some strategies to, educate the economic development professionals in Moorhead. We've paid for training opportunities for,
Yeah, just recently.
Yep, on who we are and what we do as far as economic development.
Yeah.
Again, it kind of goes back to quality rates and quality service is our focus. Staff, anything on that one?
Anyone else?
Can I just ask,
Sure.
do you use the words economic development? This is not my normal everyday lingo.
Mhm.
Somewhat akin to a marketing sort of plan, or is that something
No.
different?
Yeah, this would be different. Marketing in the sense of, at least for me, marketing is more just the selling of
Having the product.
the product,
So
as
economic
opposed to
development in this case-
growing those additional opportunities for more than sales, but for real growth of our volumes.
But then what I'm hearing is we've got, when we talk about this infill, or, we've got these areas downtown that need a customer.
Right, yeah.
How do we promote that and find that?
And I think Ralph's point on that is really a good one. We're already there. In that case, the investment has been made. So the best economic development that we can do right now is where we already have infrastructure. We're there. We've got water there. We've got electricity there. We have sewers there. We have everything there. So in that case, I think our greatest hope would be that we start to build some things in those areas. And then we sell them electricity, and we sell them water, and it hasn't cost us anything except to hook up the services. So, but in that case, if we are part of the team that is growing some buildings, 8th and Main, for example, got a 4-story structure going in there where we used to have a filling station. We're going to sell that building a lot more water and a lot more electricity than we were selling those.
Same thing with the
filling
KFC.
station.
Knights of Columbus, that
KFC,
is
yeah.
a pretty good sized apartment going up
Yeah.
there. And then you
Yeah.
got the ones across from the junkyard.
Yeah.
It's a lot of water usage.
Yeah. So we'll be able to do a lot more in those spaces than we were doing. Probably.
So Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we have a new development, we put in the infrastructure at no cost, right? Or do we actually charge the builder or the owner for the infrastructure, if you put in water lines and electricity
It's all assessed to the developer.
to the developer?
So I mean, and then assessed to the residential properties. So they pay for it over the next 20 years.
But it takes 20 years to
Yep.
get it.
Yep.
So,
So we bond for that. Nancy and city staff bond for those improvements.
so back to the point, if the infrastructure isn't already, it's in.
Right.
But the other thing is too, I mean, when it comes to electrical and water, we all know that people have started to conserve both. You know, our rates, I mean, our usage is not going up, even though the number of people goes up in town, both on the water and the electricity. So, I mean, the way we need to grow is to commercial and industrial.
Well, there's, Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, I have a question.
Jump in.
I will.
Please do.
So what you're talking about, does that fall under somewhat under strategic direction 4, where we're really looking at advancing policy issues of interest to the public utility? It doesn't seem to fit exactly that, but it seems to be in that same sort of direction. And maybe goal 4.4 could be referencing some of the things that you're talking about with regard to economic development, because clearly we're embroiled in some of the regional and local politics, and downtown is particularly it's local politics that gets downtown filled.
Yep.
So that's where I'm leaning towards.
Yeah. A couple of things that are on the horizon, though, too, that these aren't downtown by any means, but in the community, I know that we're at least having some chats about a community recreation center, something that would really be a significant new facility that provides not only opportunities for people to be well, you know, to take care of their health and their wellness and so forth, but again, it's one of those places where Moorhead Public Service is going to provide a lot of service, you know, in electricity and water, and, you know, all of the above. Aquatic center, you know, the kinds of volumes of water that we would be providing in that case. So, you know, I just hope that we as an important player in all of this can well, we'll be there to provide the service for sure. You know, we say so, and we're the only player in town. But putting on our thinking caps, where else can Moorhead grow? What else can we do? What are the employers that we're hoping to attract into this community, and what kinds of facilities are those going to be?
One of the things to think about as well, and when I do strategic planning, and I've done with a number of boards, and some do it really well, some do it okay, I don't get too wrapped up in the semantics. Mm-hmm. And Chris mentioned something that was good, you know, putting this economic development under 4.4 mm-hmm. versus, you know, like a new strategic direction, mm-hmm. I think is an interesting discussion point, mm-hmm. because it's not semantical if you tuck it at 4.4 or if you put it in strategic direction number 6, for instance. Yeah. It's going to have a higher level of priority if we put it there. So you really have to talk it through, think about it, whether or not you want it kind of front and center, and it really is something new that we're doing. Just as part of normal, everyday conversations with the commission, the staff moves and ebbs through what we believe is the direction you're providing us. Mm-hmm. And when you look at downtown and kind of participating in downtown, how is Moorhead Public Service active in downtown? You know, we looked at and found other resources to try the capture the earth. Yeah. You know, and another strategic direction that we don't have in there is like to have our mission statement says environmentally responsible, right? But we don't have a strategic direction that says environmentally proactive. Yeah. But really, the commission is looked at as a regional leader, as a proactive, environmentally responsible organization, if you call it that. And when we looked at downtown and we were asked to participate in the downtown group, and we're providing some monies, right? But we looked at, okay, what can we do that's part of who we are, and also participate in downtown? And that's where the geothermal came up. And we've gotten a lot of interest nationwide on what we're doing as far as with the American Public Power deed grant that we got. And, that's the kind of thing that when I look at either downtown development with new apartments and businesses, or even new residential areas, Dennis Eisenbrown and I and the rest of the staff are looking at this geothermal as something very interesting to pursue. So if you call that research and development, we're doing some research and development in that area. And we've gotten $250,000 to do that. But that's another, like a strategic direction that's not there, but it's kind of there. And it's semantics. But again, I hope, and I think you are, supportive in our efforts to research these things, because I do think it's kind of who we are. We're in Minnesota. We're part of Moorhead. We've talked about how can downtown Moorhead be different than downtown Fargo? And maybe it's a more environmentally responsible downtown. I mean, and that's what we're working with others as well. Like goal number 4, we're working with others to kind of pursue that. But we're still trying to say, hey, we're an electric and water utility. We don't, we're not into like taxes. We don't understand that realm. We understand water and electricity. So anyway, that's kind of my 2 cents on tying economic development and environmentally responsible utility services together.
Dennis,
I just wanted to add.
get close to a mic.
Yeah,
please.
find a mic here.
Dennis Eisenbrown, Energy Services Manager. I just wanted to remind, particularly for the newer commissioners, but we do actually have an economic development incentive policy for larger businesses that may or may not apply to somebody downtown, but we do actually have a policy in place to provide economic assistance to new businesses or businesses that are existing and expanding. So it's meant really more for the large commercial customers, but maybe we need to look at doing something on a smaller scale. But we do actually have something. So just wanted to remind you of that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, good point. Anyone else before Bill moves on? I think we've talked this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah,
some things
quite a
to
lot.
think about.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about whether you want it to be a new strategic direction, or do we place it under something else? Because I think we can definitely do that.
And I have no specific, suggestion for tonight. Yeah, it's just a discussion
Yep.
Item as far as I'm concerned, but a lot of good points. So,
Let's,
Ralph, did you have
Yeah,
something else?
if I may make one more, it's somewhat related to that. So the European Union just last week announced that they're going to make a big push to provide cleaner water to their citizens in an effort to reduce water bottles, the water bottle use. So this is one of those things where, we could, I think, make a statement and maybe attract a certain, like somebody said earlier, a certain group of people who want to live in a place that is maybe more environmentally friendly, and that is one where we can lead, right? I mean, I don't use bottled waters in Moorhead. I just right out of the tap. I know that Chris and team are making sure that I'm good, right? So, but to the point, I mean, we can really differentiate ourselves. And to Dennis's point, I think we should look.
That reliable.
They're reliable.
Stay on.
yeah, it stayed on.
So to Dennis's point too, I think we should look at our policy, because if we have it, and Bill, you said you think we're generous, but I don't see it maybe having an impact. Either we don't need it or we need to change it.
Right.
But we don't talk about it.
We don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, John?
That reminded me of one of the members of the city council said, based on the quality of water that we have city.
Yeah, we did hear that, yeah.
Because she said, I think she was in Germany, and she talks about the quality of water and how they have that. So just put that maybe back in the ideas that if that's something that we should look at or discussing. And I've thought a lot about it as far as the cost and efficiency and how you can do it, but I think she was needing to have outdoors or out in the parks or any number of areas here for it. So that's something that we can just keep in mind about. If that's something we should look at in the future.
Well, and I think we should look at those types of things. I like those because they combine who we are with something that can help the community.
Oh, yeah.
So,
I'm old, but I remember those water fountains that used to be on the street corner. You guys would never remember that. But, that was pretty common 40, 50 years ago. And it would really stand out. It'd be something, that a lot of communities have sworn off because it was a maintenance problem, it was a vandalism problem, or whatever. But it made a difference to find a drinking fountain on a street corner, in downtown, hometown, wherever you were from. Kind of a neat idea.
Like Dairy Queen.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So, anything else before we move on? Good discussion. I appreciate the discussion around this. Good stuff.
no, I'm thinking, that was really number one.
Yep.
We kind of jumped around, which is perfectly great. Number two is, you could look at it as one of the boring ones, right? Because it's I call it financial strength, right?
Let's not offend anybody in the room.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's, number one is operational excellence, number two is financial strength. And financial strength includes, having good bond ratings, which we do, having good rates, which we do, but the rates aren't as good as they used to be. We do provide a stellar amount of resources to the city through our electric rates and our water rates as well. John brought up, that we need to watch that as far as how, we have to have negotiations or conversations, I guess I should call it, with the city. And the G4 group is going to be meeting in 2018. And that is an important discussion that's going to happen. Presumably we'll get a 4-year agreement, and that 4-year agreement will, help us with our rates. I think the last 4-year agreement that we just completed made it so that we could have no rate increase this year in electric. And I think we're projecting no rate increase next year either, are we? So 2 years of no rate increases after a dozen years of rate increases every year. And many of those years we increase rates just to supply the transfer. And so 4 years ago, and when the group of four met to discuss that, I think that was a real win for all of us. The discussion this year is going to be interesting because we really assumed that we were going to grow. And with the LED lights and with, water rates going up, we both on the electric and the water side are seeing pretty much levelized growth. So we assumed some growth with our discussions with the city, and we didn't get any. So I think the discussion that's going to happen is, okay, we thought we'd get some growth. That was going to help us out. We didn't get growth. What do we do going forward? So financial standing, I'm not sure. I mean, we're in a pretty good spot. I think the G4's got some work to do, but other than that, is there any strategic directions there that you're thinking about?
That's a quick question. When is our next bond meeting? 2 years? 20?
Possibly 2020.
Okay.
So 2020.
We'll be doing some financing with the public facilities or dwarf
Dwarf.
funding for water mains and things like that. But next time we would go for a bond rating is possibly 2020.
Okay. Thanks. I know are we in sync with the city? Are they about the same time, or do they bond every year?
They bond every year and
Okay.
sometimes multiple times within a year.
Okay.
Just a quick reaction, and anybody jump in. The group of four that worked through that agreement a few years ago, is meeting again soon. Casey should have gotten a note from me asking for us to doodle poll, you know. I think yesterday I sent you a note, because one of our council members asked that we get a meeting on the schedule, so we can talk about that afterwards. But we do need to get to work, because what we'd like to do is get this done before we get into the heat of budgets. So, you know, let's get an agreement done and in place so that we've got maybe 4 more years of working. And I'll just throw this back to the little economic development conversation that we had a little while ago. You know, if we can find ways to grow in other places, grow with new buildings and new customers and so forth, we may make it a lot easier for us to continue to keep the rates where they are, but sell more stuff. And if anything, for me, that's the bottom line of the whole idea of let's participate in the development of our community, so that even if we are within the boundaries and the borders that the Chuck was alluding to, you know, how spread out do we want to get? Well, maybe we don't want to spread out at all, but how tall do we want to get, and how concentrated and dense do we want to get, so that we can make these sales? And it might be that we can find another way besides the transfer to help the city with the financial responsibilities that they have, to find resources, to find money, that doesn't require that we keep maxing out that credit card that is the transfer. So, you know, I'm looking forward to good conversation about the transfer again. We had great can-do spirit about it a few years ago, and I think we can do it again. So.
Any other things? Last thing I'll say on number 2, for the new commissioners on the board, I like to point to our policies, because you may not look at our policies very often, but I'll just kind of tell you a couple that you should really read. And one of them is called our financial strength policy, and the commission was very involved in that one before we got our bond rating upgrade. We went and redid our reserve policy and called it our financial strength policy, and we actually practically copied the rating agency's requirements for how you can get a bond rating upgrade. Yeah. And it was funny, because when the bond rating people read it, they went, "Wow, we love this policy." Well, it was basically their words, you know. But then
hold up a mirror, you know.
Yeah. And we validated them, right? I mean, we just did what they told us to. And then we put, you know, some pretty aggressive reserve requirements in there, and then we worked really hard to get there. And we did get a bond rating increase when many thought there's no way you're going to get one. So that was a real success. And so that's one policy to read. And then the other one, and Dennis mentioned it, was to read the economic development policy. Those are 2 policies that the commission spent a lot of time on. A lot of our policies are pretty routine, but those 2 policies are good ones to kind of research and take a look at sometime in your spare time.
The charter may be another document that would be good for.
Yeah.
If they haven't had a chance to go.
Yep, the charter, chapters 7 and chapter 11, right? 7, I think it's 7 and 11. 7 and 11, easy to remember.
Or bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Or Slurpees.
I was thinking more of the convenience store, but.
I have those in your iPad and Dropbox.
I think they're there.
Well, remember Chair Anderson can't get to his.
Yeah,
It's over there. It's got 3% charge on it.
I've gotten that message, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so number 2, kind of done with that one, we can always come back to it, financial strength.
Yep.
Number 3, attract and retain qualified staff. This might be one where you actually would like to page back and look at the sub-goals under that one. Because that one, we have done a lot of work in the last 3 years on culture and some of those types of things. And there are some directions in there that you should pay attention to. 3.1 is not I mean, that's just basically making sure our organizational policies are, well, actually, that one deals with compensation plans, so we just talked about that one, so we don't need to talk about 3.1. 3.2 is all the culture initiative we've had, and we really are in year 3 of that. I call it Culture Initiative 101, 201, 301. We're in 301 right now. And 401, I like to say, is goal 3.3. Unite the MPS team at one location. And so that's a capital item because it's gonna cost, money to do that. And we were somewhat timing it with our sludge handling facility project, just to have construction going on at the same time and maybe bonding at the same time, but that may or may not be necessary, but we are investigating, moving out of City Hall and moving to one location. And there's a number of reasons to take a look at that. One of them is culture, just because having people in the same location is a little more efficient and it's nice to bump into each other. So that would be a nice thing. I mean, I've talked to other utilities that say, yeah, you guys really do it weird in Moorhead. And that what they're saying is, we've got a third of our staff at City Hall and 2/3 of our staff out here. So that's a strategic direction. So, I mean, we need to talk about that one on whether or not we're gonna do that. We actually, in 2017, and it hasn't occurred yet, so it's still ongoing, but the city is taking over roughly 25% of the space that we did have up at City Hall. So they're actually running out of space as well. So I'm thinking in a couple of years, they may just say, it would be great if you guys would move out, And so that may actually help with this conversation, but I think part of the city is also thinking, hey, we're a one-stop shop, I mean, it's nice to have all of this together for our customers. But if you actually look at the data on that, I mean, there's not a lot of customers that go to our department and then go up to the city and do something else. I mean, they just come to pay their bill. So, but from a feeling standpoint, it's gonna feel like, we're losing part of the city out of City Hall. Change is tough, so. But anyway, that's one to take a look at, and then.
Bill, I have to.
Oh, go ahead.
To point out though, and you make good points. But I have to make the point too, that there's some real strong feelings at City Hall about that idea. And along with the conversations among us, we really have to, I think, have a really good heart-to-heart conversation with the leadership at City Hall about that too. Because we've got some folks from, I think, the city manager on down who really want to work that out with us, on what the best choice is. So I appreciate your enthusiasm, and the culture team has worked toward this as well, but we really have to cross the T's and dot the I's and so forth with our friends at City Hall about that one. So I only bring that up because that's gonna just be a very necessary piece of the puzzle. They wanna move out of City Hall too.
Right.
And so, what conceptually what that means, I don't know at this stage. I don't think they do. But maybe it does mean that there is a campus environment that can be put together that might work. So let's keep an open mind and engage that conversation as well with those folks, because that creates a little heartburn among some of the folks.
Yeah, well, and that's why you should take it, that's why we're talking about strategic directions, because if you read the words on goal 3.3, it says we're doing it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you need to be engaged in that.
Well, it does, and Chuck started to look like he was gonna say something.
No, I'm just glad you brought it up,
Oh,
because
okay.
I know there's some concern there, so.
Okay, John?
Just as a favor towards me, I was, this specific area, goal 3.1 has changed from last year. 3.2 changed, 3.3 is new, and 3.4 is new from last are making changes or modification, can it be underlined or italicized somehow so we know
Oh, that's really helpful, yeah.
what that change would be?
Yep.
Here, because if you didn't compare the different plans, and that's the reason why I wanted to take it back and get a chance to look at it, that, we wouldn't have known this. We would have approved it here back in December, I think, when we first looked at this, and that would have been part of our strategic plan, which I think would have been creating problems for us. So I agree with Dave that 3.3 needs to be changed somehow in the title as far as either research, the way we look at it, or collaborate with the city to have one location, or something to the effect that we have more of a collaborative effort here, because this says we are going to have a place, and we are gonna be at our own place, which I don't think that was what we had talked about, or that decision has been made at this point, so.
Right.
I agree, Dave, that's critical that we make something, and I make a comment on it as well.
Yeah, I think we should keep the city in loop. I think we should keep it really open, because like Dave said, I don't know how long we're gonna be at that city hall, so maybe a campus environment, just keep things open. 'Cause that's kind of what the city was asking, so. Good communication. It's lacking these days, so. Not with the city and the MPS, just in general.
Just in general, yeah, okay. All right. Anything else?
Then Bill and I talked about the 3.4 here, and just as far as, and maybe that's just how you implement it here, but we talked about the idea of not only having the perception of this being implemented for the top tier employees. I think we talked about initially making sure all staff is aware that we have training program available to them that will share the cost. It goes all the way down to all employees. So how we can reinforce the idea that we have these opportunities for additional training, because I think for me, it's important that all staff is aware that there's opportunities there, and that we want them to invest in themselves to improve, and in the long run, then that'll be a benefit to the utility.
Yeah, and that was a good reminder. John and I talked about this, and that's another policy. We have a policy on development, I'm not sure what it's called, where we, the commission generously allows people to take classes, to advance, as long as it benefits more public service. And that actually is included with the IBW, or with all the collective bargaining units.
I think it's in the professional supervisory handbook, but we've used that with those other employee groups also.
So, but to communicate that, so we are encouraging
Right.
our staff to do that. And more of an emphasis now because of the succession planning that we've been talking about, the fact that there's baby boomers here, just like everywhere else, that are gonna leave. So, and then this would be an area where, succession planning could be discussed, and we have talked about that in the past. We've got an internal policy on that, not a commission policy. But that's also, if you look in your policies, you'll see succession planning. But that's a policy, so that gives a framework it's basically for if the general manager leaves, or it gets hit by the bus. And hopefully not a MAT bus.
Where is that bus?
Yeah. But that policy is succession planning, it's under the administrative area. But anyway, that's a discussion that can happen in strategic planning as well. Because that's an important item to discuss. So yeah, good comments on that one. I mean, when we talk about this again, we'll put the strike and underline version so you can see the difference between last year and this year. And that'll help Cheryl too, so she knows because it didn't change a lot.
What's the timeframe on finalizing this plan?
Well, frankly, that's kind of why we stick it in the budget packet, just to get it done, because it didn't change that much. Sometimes the commission talks about it a lot, and sometimes they don't talk about it that much. It should be approved sometime in the first 6 months, because we're basically building plans off of this. But like I said, 60 to 80% of the plans are kind of rock solid. They're gonna be there whether you approve it or not. But then the ones where you're changing the direction, you know, sooner rather than later would be good to approve it. I'd say this is a new 3-year period. You know, cause next year will be easier, the year after that will be a little bit easier, cause we'll just follow with the same plan.
Can we try to tidy this up and have it done in March?
Well,
Is that possible?
yeah, we sure can, cause you can always revise it, but
Yeah.
yeah, we could,
It'd be nice to
Yep.
get to a point where we can take action on it,
Yep.
be comfortable with it.
Yep.
We've got some work to do based on our conversation,
Yep.
but yeah.
Yep.
okay.
So we can, you know, for our March meeting, we can draft up some changes, put it in strike and underline, and then you guys can talk about it again, prove it, or maybe it'll take you 1 more month, so.
Okay.
Okay, so that's number 3, and we talked about that one quite a bit. Number 4, and Chris brought that up, and that's, number 4 generally is kind of the, being active in government, whether it's state, local, or federal, and that's Dave Anderson going to the American Public Power fly-in is part of that. We do need to be, since we're a larger municipal utility in the country, we have to be active in those types of things. And so that's why we have a strategic direction in order to do that. I wouldn't recommend backing away from that. In fact, in a lot of respects, we have a lot of, resources that others don't have, so they look to us for leadership. So I think it's a good one.
Yeah.
So I don't have really any changes on that one. I don't know. John's keeping track of the changes. Did this one change? I don't think it changed probably at all.
I haven't seen anything, but
Yeah. I mean, basically, we deal with a lot of federal legislation, federal and state legislation. We deal with a lot of federal and state regulations. And so this one is just, hey, we gotta be paying attention to these things, cause the legislators or the regulators are making changes, and we just have to have our voice heard, so.
You staff that are monitoring this?
Well, it ends up being probably myself primarily, and then the rest of the staff, like water and electric for sure, the division managers are watching these things as well. Cause basically you go to, conferences, fly-ins, and then you're on conference calls, you get to hear these issues, and then we end up having to call our representatives and say, or, their staff, right? And talk to them about what we need and what we agree or disagree with something. A lot of it, probably 90% of legislation is defensive. Only 10% is proactive, so.
And we have on the electrical side, a good relationship with MRES as well, so
Yep.
they feed us information, right?
Yeah,
Do
they
we have anything like that on the water side?
We're involved with
Mike.
the equivalent on the water side is the American Water Works Association, which we're involved with at the state level. Not quite as much at the national level, but they do quite a bit of advocacy on the national level in terms of policy and those types of things.
Because I was thinking about, no pun intended here, with the sludge ponds, right? That surprised us a little bit, I think. Did we have advance notice that was coming, or?
Not really, not on
Yeah.
that one. That was more of a state
Yep.
level decision that the PCA just kind of made, and then it had some pretty, maybe unintended consequences for a variety of folks.
Regional water.
Yeah, but then we talked about the regional water with lava, obviously, with this water supply side, so.
Is that embodied anywhere in our strategic plan as far as those particular resource areas? It seems to me that we ought to be talking about that.
I put it under 2.1 in terms
Yeah.
of water supply.
Yeah, okay. We don't have to
That's what I
get
wrote down.
that specific.
Nothing explicit, I would say.
Right now, and I would only go back to the conversation that Bill and I had with the city manager or the city administrator over in Fargo concerning the possibility of considering another way to access water supply from the Red River. that's probably a line of work that we would want to express as an alternate to the aquifer strategy. Because, you know, that would be two parallel paths, sort of, you know, before we actually expend any capital, you know, on them, but they're two very different alternates.
Typically, we'd have those as sub-goals, just,
Yeah.
you know, continue to monitor those things and continue to develop the Buffalo Aquifer management.
Yep.
And the capital projects that'd be associated with Buffalo Aquifer.
Sure, okay.
Well, and this one, I mean, I haven't talked to Chris about this, but this is an area too where if the commission's gonna, you know, spend a little bit of time on our strategic plan and get to this level, basically the 4.1 level, and Chris is talking about the 4.11 level.
Yep. But we start to see that as the plan develops, we start to see all those pieces.
You'll see it if you're paying attention to, you know,
We pay
updates,
attention.
right? But I mean, but again, back to the 4.4 versus a strategic direction 6.
Yeah.
That is a important enough area and a visible area, political area, and a very impactful area that you may want to lift that one up a bit more. And Chris and I can discuss that as to whether or not we have a new 2.2 and shift everything else down and actually talk about
Right.
that there's, because right now we're developing the Buffalo Aquifer. And so that strategic direction is happening. So we maybe should have that explicitly in here at a high level so they know that that's the direction we're going. So then it's like if there's a different direction, we have to look at this.
I would say we make water supply a whatever level, high level issue. I don't know whether you read the news, but the city of Cape Town with 3.7 million people is going to run out of water on April 13th. They're going to shut down the water system. Right? We don't want to be in the news like that. No, we have the aquifer. We are in good shape, but I think it warrants a level that says, you know, not only quality water, but having the water supply and looking at all options. It may still go east, right? But at least look at the option. I think that is a big one for us to consider.
John?
Expand on that, I don't know how much people. Just to expand on that, I don't know if you've looked at that very closely, but just some of the things they try to implement to reduce water usage wasn't very successful. Even high-cost water didn't reduce the usage, so that certainly causes some concern as far as if we ever are exposed to that environment, what are we going to do? Because increasing the rates doesn't change people's use of water. So that's a good study for us to just keep track of.
Yeah, well, and we have kept track of that, and there's studies out there that talk about that, because we have summer rates versus winter rates, and our summer rates are how much higher than our winter rates? I thought it was like 70% higher.
Somewhere in that.
70%, so about, you know, not twice, but a little less than that. And it really it doesn't impact the amount of usage that much. I can't remember what the studies show, but it's like multiples.
We have seen per capita go down quite a bit over the course of 15 years.
Yeah.
We've come down from like 120 gallons per day per person to more like 80. So we just because of, I would say mostly the rate pressure, we've seen that per capita usage go down quite a bit. So there is some rate, people are observing that signal, but in an emergency situation, people kind of just maybe have different tendencies or take whatever they need to take kind of mentality.
Comparatively, our water is usually current.
Yeah.
What they're looking at, so.
Okay, Bill?
Good discussion on number 4. We'll add to that, Chris and I will talk about 2.1, bring something back. Strategic direction number 5 is the one I talked about earlier, innovative technologies. And we basically split this up into electric and water, and there again, we probably should show some of the things we're working on underneath of both of those. You know, under electric, I mean, we've got capture the sun, capture the wind. You know, we've got automated metering infrastructure that we're looking at. That's a big capital item. Travis is working on that, and we've looked at pilots and that type of thing. We were gonna do one in Oakport, but we said, no, let's just get this done. But we're still looking at automated metering infrastructure. Missouri River Energy Services is doing some work on that as well, so we're partnering with them to maybe make it work. Pardon me? Car charger. Oh, okay, yeah.
Car chargers, yeah.
Yeah, we got that in
People
the
are asking
budget for
that.
this year, yeah. So that's an innovative, you know, that's one of those things that probably, Dennis mentioned this, and certainly in 10 years, probably in 6 years, they're gonna be all over the place. Everybody's really excited about the first few,
Cass
and
County
we are looking at
Electric
that.
is installing 4 car chargers on the Sanford campus this
Oh,
year.
okay, yeah.
So let's not fall too far behind.
Well, we've got money in the budget for this year.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's happening. Yeah, I just learned that today. It's interesting how rapidly that's starting to come around.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, you have car manufacturers saying they're gonna be electric in 4 years.
Yeah.
I think Volvo
Oh, yeah.
said
Gotta get it done.
last year, gotta get done, yeah.
Well, I understand there's a Tesla on its way to Mars today.
Yeah.
With a long extension cord.
A red Tesla.
Red Tesla?
Yeah, that's what he's got in the front of that rocket ship that took off today.
Make it out of the atmosphere, he was afraid it was gonna blow up.
Yeah, no, I think it did, yeah. I didn't hear that it didn't, so.
Bill, where do we have security in all this?
Probably on,
Physical as well as,
yep, item number
Cyber.
1. I'm guessing item number 1 is where we got all the
okay,
physical and cybersecurity.
yep, okay. And then you and I talked a little bit, we need to wind this up for this time, but you and I talked a little bit this afternoon about putting a little bit of soul and humanity into a couple of pieces of this. This reads a lot like an engineer. And
I'll take that as a compliment.
yeah, take that as a compliment. All y'all in the room that, you know, yeah, but we are a utility.
Yeah.
Out. Out. When you address the chair. No, but we were talking about customer service, and we've had a couple of situations where we were applying it very directly, so it wasn't necessarily objective, but it was. But I was finding as I was examining this with that in the scenario, I was finding that what we say about customer service is a little bit hard and cold, and it actually doesn't even say customer service. It says service of customers. You know, that's a very different thing than customer service. So, and we've talked a little bit about the language, but when we come back, why don't we get into that a little bit next time?
Okay, yeah. I mean, and I'll just say that 2017 was like the year of the customer for Moorhead Public Service. I think there's a few things coming together that's making it, you know, front and center, because we're getting a lot more customer issues coming to the surface.
Yep.
And we've got a new city manager, we've got a council that's very interested in it. We get a lot more calls, you know, because they're getting calls from customers that we've interrupted their service.
Right.
And we interrupt their service so that they'll pay their bill.
Yep.
And it's a common utility practice, but I do think that there's some things that we can look at, and we have been looking at it. So I think that we could spend a whole meeting on, probably.
I'm sure we could. Yeah.
And we did talk about even doing a strategic direction that would kind of put more attention on that. And I think that's a good idea, because I think that's what it's gonna take
Yeah.
in order to nudge us in that direction.
I think we could examine, you know, some of our procedures and such, and again, listen to our friends over at City Hall, because we're handling their customers too.
Yep. Yep.
And I think they have some thoughts about how we can do that.
Yep.
So,
No, that sounds good.
cool. Anything else from you folks? As we try try to
Put-
wind this thing up for tonight.
We'll revise this and put it back on the agenda for March.
Okay. So, what, we need to table or do anything with this, or just
I don't
let it
think
lie
so.
till next week?
Yeah. just let it-
Parliamentary, what do you think?
Yep.
Well, it says approved.
It says approve, so
We just not take action.
just not take action. Okay, we can do that, okay. Alrighty, well, according to the agenda then, we don't need to close tonight, that I know of. I haven't been given any instructions about that, so we don't need to close. Upcoming meetings, we already mentioned a couple things that are coming along. And I would encourage, all of us to look at the rest of the calendar there and see where it is that we might be able to participate and jump in to represent us, either at APPA or Minnesota. They'll probably have a legislative gathering down in yep, there it is, in April, down in St. Paul.
And the other one, I mean, the MMUA Legislative Conference is a good one if you,
Yep.
you know, have a liking to walk around the Capitol and talk to your legislators, you know. They come around here, so you can also, you know, at intergovernmental retreat, we were able to
Actually,
talk
those-
to them.
Those are more effective
Yeah.
contacts than down there.
The other one to take a look at, if you happen to be able to spend 2 days away, is the MRES annual meeting. Because they actually have very good speakers that come in, and you basically start at noon on one day, and then you end it at noon on the next day. I'm not sure if it's, because it only says May 9th, but I know it's a 2-day event. But starts at noon, ends at noon, and they have some really good speakers, so. Because they bring in APPA and some of these other entities to speak. So, and the national conference is excellent, the APPA one, and the AWWA one is, AWWA one is actually much larger than the APPA one.
Is
And
it
it makes sense, well, because everybody's got a water utility,
Sure.
but only 2,000 out of 8,000 have a electric municipal utility.
New Orleans in June, that sounds
Yeah, I don't like when they do that.
kind of sweat.
Hotel rooms are cheap then.
Yeah, but the hotel rooms are cheap. The hotel rooms are cheap, yeah, okay. Well, if there is nothing else, I would either adjourn us or ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, second, anybody?
Second?
Got a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thanks, folks.